Why do so many intelligent people withdraw from social life? Schopenhauer believed that the more a person understands life, the less they can tolerate the superficiality of the crowd. And that's why so many of history's great minds chose silence over celebration, solitude over applause. Today, you're going to discover the brutal explanation this philosopher gave. A truth as uncomfortable as it is liberating, one that may change how you understand your own loneliness. We live in an era that glorifies constant connection, social visibility, and popularity as markers of emotional health. But what if we're confusing noise with depth? What if social withdrawal, in some cases, isn't a flaw, but a lucid response to the mediocrity of our surroundings? Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most incisive and pessimistic minds in modern philosophy, had no patience for shallow interactions. For him, the closer someone gets to the truth about the world, themselves, and others, the harder it becomes to find joy in casual social engagement. Not out of arrogance, but due to a fundamental mismatch in perception. In this thought-provoking exploration, we'll uncover why, according to Schopenhauer, real intelligence often leads to isolation, and why that solitude, far from being a failure, might be a sign of a mind that sees too much to pretend otherwise. Schopenhauer saw the world as an essentially tragic place. To him, life was governed by a blind, irrational force called the will, a relentless, insatiable impulse that drives us without reason, trapping us in an endless cycle of frustrated desires. In other words, we're stuck in a game where the only prize is the temporary relief from suffering. Now imagine what happens when a truly intelligent mind perceives this with clarity. Reality stops being comforting. Distractions lose their meaning. Everyday conversations, social rituals, and convenient encounters begin to look like a poorly rehearsed play, one where everyone pretends not to notice the emptiness behind the curtain. For Schopenhauer, human suffering is rooted in consciousness. The more you understand the nature of existence, the more you feel the weight of its tragedy. That's why the most lucid individuals not only suffer more, they also become strangers in their own world. They can no longer adapt to what is considered normal, because to them, the normal seems absurd. And that's where withdrawal begins. People with a high level of perception start to avoid interactions based on vanity, status, or self-promotion, all of which are foundational elements of modern social life. Not out of shyness or pure misanthropy, but because there's a mental cost to remaining in environments where nothing true is being said. Schopenhauer didn't view social life as a space for fulfillment, but rather as a form of collective anesthesia, a place where boredom is disguised with laughter, where the fear of silence is filled with noise. Being among many, for him, was like being far from oneself, and that was unbearable for someone who had something more valuable: self-awareness. In his writings, he states with brutal clarity, "Solitude is the fate of all great minds." This isn't romanticized melancholy, it's a logical observation. The level of depth these people reach makes them incompatible with the light flow of typical social interactions. They can't stand what he called the noise of existence. That's why, for the philosopher, it wasn't surprising that great thinkers, artists, and geniuses chose solitude. It was a natural consequence of their worldview. While most fight for belonging, they run from distraction. While many seek to be seen, they seek to truly see. And that pursuit comes at a cost: distance. When highly intelligent people withdraw from social life, society is quick to label them as weird, antisocial, or even disordered. But what Schopenhauer offers is the opposite perspective. The question isn't why some people isolate themselves. It's why so many feel the need to constantly be with others. What exactly is so valuable in always being surrounded? To the philosopher, very little. Schopenhauer didn't see solitude as punishment, but as a privilege. one reserved for those who carry something truly valuable inside. A mind that thinks, that reflects, that questions, needs silence. And the world, in contrast, screams. It screams trivialities, shallow opinions, empty conversations. For the lucid mind, it's not just annoying, it's painful. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he does not love freedom." A harsh line, but one that gets to the core. There is something deeply wrong about needing constant company in order to endure your own existence. For Schopenhauer, the more shallow a person is, the more dependent they are on external noise, because their inner silence is unbearable. This is where isolation starts to appear, not as a voluntary lifestyle choice, but as an almost inevitable reaction. Lucidity demands space. Deep thought requires withdrawal. It's not an escape, it's self-defense. The external world, to a conscious individual, becomes a battlefield of noise that blocks the inner voice from speaking. The idea that social life is inherently fulfilling is, in Schopenhauer's view, a modern myth. He saw most human relationships as driven by vanity, convenience, or the fear of being alone. There's little depth, just exchange. No real encounter, just performance. And the more a person perceives this, the more they feel out of place. This is what Schopenhauer called the exile of the lucid mind, a state in which the individual realizes that their sensitivity makes them incompatible with the crowd. There's no way to fit in without betraying oneself, no way to participate without being drained. So what remains is distance, not out of pride, but integrity. Schopenhauer goes even further. For him, withdrawal is a form of resistance, a silent scream against the tyranny of distraction, a personal affirmation in a world that demands conformity. Isolation in this context isn't illness, it's a diagnosis. He challenges the cultural script that says solitude equals failure. He shows that solitude, for the right mind, is clarity. It's where truth is visible, unfiltered by the expectations of others. We live in a world that romanticizes intelligence but rewards mediocrity. Society claims to admire brilliant minds, as long as they don't make too much noise, as long as they don't disturb the flow, as long as they don't expose the fragility of collective normality. And here lies a brutal paradox Schopenhauer pointed out without hesitation. Stupidity, or rather intellectual superficiality, is what truly keeps social life running smoothly. Yes, stupidity is functional. It lubricates social interaction. People who don't think deeply don't ask uncomfortable questions. They go with the flow, follow common sense, keep conversations light and expectations low. They laugh easily, distract themselves quickly, and never, absolutely never, challenge the logic behind what everyone is doing. Schopenhauer saw this behavior as a kind of unconscious survival mechanism. To him, the world is driven by an irrational force, the will. And those who live without questioning it are, in some ways, better adapted. They don't suffer from lucidity. They live on autopilot, and that makes them easier to get along with. The problem is, in this scenario, truly intelligent individuals become a disruption. They destabilize the surface-level harmony of the group. They start asking, doubting, probing. They come across as negative, too intense, overly critical. And so, they're pushed to the margins. Not because they're arrogant, but because their presence reminds everyone of what they're avoiding. Schopenhauer didn't mince words. Mediocrity of intellect is the rule among men. For him, harmony among people is only possible when everyone agrees to a certain degree of mutual ignorance. Everyone pretends everything is fine, that the rituals make sense, that boredom doesn't exist. But if someone breaks that illusion, with a sharper observation, an honest question, the whole social fabric starts to unravel. That's why mediocrity is socially rewarded. It allows relationships to remain smooth, predictable, and pleasant. It keeps the group intact. And the price? Truth is left outside. Depth is seen as a threat. Reflective silence is mistaken for rudeness. Meanwhile, well-behaved ignorance enjoys a comfortable reign. But what about those who see beyond? Those who feel the discomfort in automatic conversations, the emptiness in routine events, the performance in everyday social life. These people become strangers in familiar settings. They're called difficult, too much, hard to be around. When in reality, they're just seeing what others refuse to acknowledge. For them, withdrawal isn't a decision, it's a reaction. Not arrogance, but self-preservation. Too much clarity makes certain environments mentally toxic. And so, the lucid ones isolate themselves. Not out of superiority, but out of necessity, because there's only so much mediocrity a sensitive mind can take before it begins to erode. Schopenhauer offers a crucial insight here. The more a man is of real worth, the more he will avoid the society of others. Not out of hatred, but because most people operate on a level of awareness so far from his that real dialogue becomes nearly impossible. What remains are noises, roles, and repeated scripts, with little truth, if any. This perspective may seem elitist, but Schopenhauer isn't talking about academic titles or IQ. He's speaking of perception, the ability to think against the grain, to question what's taken for granted. And this kind of intelligence is almost always solitary. What this part of Schopenhauer's philosophy reveals is unsettling. Modern social life isn't made for those who think too deeply. That's why so many people stay quiet, adapt, and pretend. But those who can't, those who must speak what they see, eventually get pushed out of the artificial paradise of collective comfort. There's a romanticized image of intelligence, as if it were a gift, a noble quality that lights up life and attracts admiration. But those who live with deep lucidity know the truth. Thinking too much can feel like a curse, a weight on the chest, a burden that robs life of its lightness, distances friendships, and complicates love. Schopenhauer saw this with brutal clarity. To him, the truly intelligent mind is never at peace. It perceives too much, feels too much, notices what others avoid. And that radical sensitivity makes everything heavier. Everyday life, relationships, even the simplest emotions. Love, for instance, ceases to be a fairy tale. It becomes a battlefield of illusions, unconscious games, and projected expectations. Emotional intelligence doesn't allow for self-deception, and that scares people. The other person senses, even if unconsciously, that they're being truly seen, and that's when the connection starts to break. Not out of malice, but because intimacy loses its comfort. Friendships suffer too. People expect emotional reciprocity in a predictable rhythm, compliments at the right time, shared laughs, unconditional support. But the lucid individual often responds with silence, analysis, or questions. They can't pretend, and that honesty, even in its quiet form, can be unbearable to someone who just wants ease. This is why many intelligent people end up alone, not because they don't know how to love, but because they love with lucidity. Not because they don't want friends, but because they feel the emptiness in most social exchanges. They can't endure what they call connection if it lacks substance. And when they don't adapt, they're labeled difficult, too intense, coldly rational. But the truth is, the sensitive mind is in constant conflict. It longs for connection, but can't tolerate falseness. It craves closeness, but shuts down around superficiality. It yearns for lightness, but sees the world collapsing beneath the surface. In the end, it becomes exiled, too close to ignore, too deep to join in. Schopenhauer described this as the burden of consciousness. The more a person understands the mechanics of life, the harder it becomes to live with ease. The veil is lifted, the illusion is gone, and what remains is weight, not just intellectual weight, but existential. This awareness makes lightness nearly impossible. Common distractions, parties, social media, shallow entertainment, lose their flavor. Everything starts to feel like a performance, and that generates a type of loneliness that isn't just social. It's metaphysical, a sense that you and the world are vibrating on different frequencies. And the worst part? Those who live on that higher frequency often can't explain it, because there's no language to translate the pain of seeing too much, of watching life unfold like a play where everyone's acting, except you. In this sense, intelligence becomes a curse, not in the form of constant suffering, but of inevitable exclusion, of being unable to join the dance because you've seen the wires behind the stage. And once you see them, you can't unsee them, and pretending becomes torture. But Schopenhauer also offered a path forward. He believed that this pain, when embraced, could turn into wisdom, that forced isolation could transform into creative solitude, that lucidity, instead of being rejected, could be cultivated as a higher way of living, even if it meant walking alone. That requires an internal shift, a letting go of certain hopes. Yes, some doors will close, but others, doors to depth, to creation, to inner freedom, will open. It's not an easy life, but it can be a true one. And for many, that's enough. We live in a culture that treats solitude as a failure. Silence is seen as a symptom, introspection, a defect. Preferring your own inner world is often met with suspicion. We're taught from a young age that a good life is a social one, that being surrounded, visible, and engaged is a sign of emotional health. And anyone who strays from that path is seen as broken. But Schopenhauer flips this logic entirely. For him, the problem isn't with those who withdraw. It's with those who can't bear to be alone. He writes, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he does not love freedom." This isn't just a poetic line. It's a direct hit to the modern cult of extroversion. Why, then, do we feel guilty for not always wanting to be around others? Why do so many people feel wrong for preferring silence to small talk, a book to a party, depth to presence? The answer is simple and brutal. We've been programmed too. Modern society built a narrative in which a person's value is measured by their number of social connections. The more friends, events, and group photos, the more emotionally balanced you're assumed to be. And by contrast, those who move in the opposite direction are treated as incomplete, weird, or socially dysfunctional. Schopenhauer forces us to look at this structure with suspicion. He suggests that clinging to constant social contact is not a sign of health. It's a form of avoidance. Avoidance of self, avoidance of awareness, avoidance of the inner emptiness that only silence can expose. He argues that the less inner content a person has, the more they need external stimulation to avoid collapse. That's why, according to him, average minds are highly sociable. Not because they deeply enjoy others, but because they can't stand being alone with their own thoughts. This is a devastating critique, because it hits the core of what we believe about human connection. It reveals that many social interactions are not driven by love or empathy, but by the need to stay distracted, a comfortable noise that keeps us from having to ask the real questions. As a result, people who are more introspective, more intellectually demanding, more sensitive, end up feeling defective. They internalize the belief that they're less because they don't fit into this model of constant availability. And so they try to adapt, even when that adaptation goes against their nature. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the real issue is the system? Schopenhauer offers an alternative path. Stop feeling guilty. Recognize that your discomfort with social noise isn't a flaw. It's awareness. Understand that disconnection is not always a problem to be fixed. Sometimes it's a conscious, necessary choice. This doesn't mean rejecting all social life, but it does mean refusing the pressure to always be on, to always say yes, to always be visible, just to appear normal. It means saying no to forced sociability, and yes to the quiet, silent authenticity of someone who honors their own rhythm. This is Schopenhauer's most provocative offering. Flip the game. Stop trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for minds like yours. Stop apologizing for needing solitude, silence, space. And above all, stop feeling wrong for being deep in a shallow world. In a society that constantly pushes us away from ourselves, choosing to be alone is an act of rebellion, and rebellion doesn't need applause, just courage. If you've ever felt out of place, if the presence of others often feels lonelier than solitude, maybe nothing is wrong with you. Maybe the real problem is the norm we're all pressured to follow. But what if the opposite is true? What if choosing solitude, in a world that fears it, is the truest form of self-respect? So, what if the real problem was never solitude itself, but how we've been taught to fear it? Throughout this journey, we've seen how Schopenhauer challenged the modern obsession with constant socialization. For him, solitude wasn't a sign of failure, it was a consequence of depth. The more you understand the world, the less you can tolerate its noise. The more you see, the harder it becomes to pretend. And yet, we live in a culture that pathologizes silence, that makes us feel wrong for enjoying our own company. That equates being alone with being broken. But Schopenhauer flips the script. What if needing others all the time is the real dysfunction? The truth is, deep awareness often comes with discomfort. Thinking too much, feeling too deeply, questioning what others take for granted. These things naturally create distance. Not because you want to be alone, but because what surrounds you no longer resonates. But instead of honoring that space, we're taught to fill it. With noise, with company, with anything that distracts us from the discomfort of truth. And in doing so, we start to believe that there's something wrong with us. Not with the world we're reacting to. Schopenhauer invites us to question that narrative, to stop apologizing for not fitting in, to stop feeling guilty for choosing silence over superficiality, to understand that solitude, when embraced consciously, is not isolation, it's clarity. That clarity can hurt, it can feel heavy, it can cost relationships, social status, even peace of mind. But it also brings something irreplaceable, the ability to live aligned with what you truly are, not what you're expected to be. This isn't a call to retreat from the world forever. It's a call to stop running from yourself, to stop mistaking discomfort for dysfunction, to reclaim solitude as a space of self-respect, a place where you no longer have to dilute your mind to be accepted. Because in a world that runs on noise, silence is a form of power. In a culture obsessed with visibility, discretion is a form of strength. And in a society that fears introspection, the ability to be alone is the ultimate freedom. So if you felt out of place, overwhelmed, or even punished by your own awareness, don't shrink, don't numb it, don't rush back to the crowd. Sometimes, the clearest minds are the quietest ones. And maybe, just maybe, being alone is how you finally come home to yourself.